William Wilberforce was a British politician in the late 18th and early 19th century, and he's most famous for helping abolish the African slave trade. Wilberforce was a rising political star. By the time he was just 25 years old, he'd already become an independent member of British Parliament. But in parallel with his rise to political stardom was a rise in discontentment. He was exactly the type of man that Solomon would say had everything, yet had nothing. He had contempt for all the wealth and the luxury of the British parliamentarians, and he was wrestling on what to do about this. And that's when God showed up in his life. Through a chance encounter with his former schoolmaster named Isaac Milner, William Wilberforce began to wrestle with the truths of Christianity until he ultimately submitted and surrendered to Jesus and became a Christian. But when William Wilberforce became a Christian, it precipitated a crisis in his life. He wondered if the Lord was calling him to leave politics altogether, to retreat from public life, and live more of a monk-like lifestyle. And it was in the midst of this that he met with another pastor named John Newton. Perhaps you've heard the name John Newton. It was John Newton who wrote the famous hymn, Amazing Grace. And this meeting between Wilberforce and John Newton would actually go down as one of the most important meetings in all of British history. Because John Newton encouraged William Wilberforce not to retreat from public life, but instead to use his position in politics to fight for good in the world. I'll let John Piper, the theologian, have the last word on William Wilberforce. Here's what he said. The battle, that is against slavery, consumed almost 46 years of William Wilberforce's life. The defeats and setbacks along the way would have caused the ordinary politician to embrace a more popular cause. Though he never lost a parliamentary election from age 21 to 74, the cause of abolishing the slave trade was defeated 11 times before its passage in 1807. And the battle for abolishing slavery itself did not gain the decisive victory until 3 days before Wilberforce died in 1833. What were the roots of this man's endurance in the cause of public righteousness? Well, I believe the roots of Christian endurance, of fighting evil with good in Wilberforce, it was the truth that when all of us come to Jesus, there should be put in our hearts through the Holy Spirit a relentlessness to fight evil with good. We all know the problems. Like, we can look out at the world and see evil and we can talk about it all the time. But the question is, are we problem people or solution people? William Wilberforce was a solution person, and the Holy Spirit put a desire in his heart to go against the war against slavery and to fight that till the end of his days. He fought with good. And that's what I want to encourage all of us through Ecclesiastes 4 this morning to do. Here's the take-home message. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Now, maybe you grew up singing a church song with that tune as the chorus. I know I did, but it's from Romans 12:21. That's what Paul says in Romans 12:21. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. If you look at your Bibles in Ecclesiastes 4, you'll probably see a heading such as something that says the evil under the sun. Here in Ecclesiastes 4, Solomon is just looking out at the world and naming and acknowledging all the evils that live among us that haven't maybe changed very much for these 3,000 years since Solomon. But we want to look at them, name them, acknowledge them, and then ask, what's the good we should fight for? So here's the first evil we're going to look at. Do not be overcome by the evil of oppression. The evil of oppression. Look at verse 1. Again, I saw all the oppressions that are done under the sun, and behold, the tears of the oppressed, and they had no one to comfort them. On the side of their oppressors there was power, and there was no one to comfort them. And I thought the dead who are already dead more fortunate than the living who are still alive. But better than both is he who has not yet been and has not seen the evil deeds that are done under the sun. Solomon would have really understood oppression because Solomon was a Jew. And the Jewish people, their story was a story of being oppressed in Egypt. For 400 years, the Jewish people were oppressed by the Egyptians. And so he would have a history of his people, of oppression. And remember that he's the king over Israel in Jerusalem, so he can just look out at his kingdom. He can look out at the world from a privileged position and see these things. And one thing he notices is the continuity throughout human history of oppressors and oppressed people. He's saying this has just been a reality. There's systemic ways it's been a reality. He's also saying there's personal and individual ways it's been a reality. So think of the person who has an oppressive boss, who can boss them around and make them do things that are oppressive. Or think of people who are oppressed within their family, or people who are oppressed socially, racially, economically. He's saying this is just a reality, and he's just naming that. The language he uses is very graphic. He doesn't only say there are oppressed people, he says, I saw the tears of the oppressed. That could be translated, the oppressed who were in tears. And keep in mind that Solomon, right before Ecclesiastes 4, he's been telling us that we should go out and enjoy life, eat and drink and take satisfaction in our toil. But right in Ecclesiastes 4, right after that, he's acknowledging that some people don't have the same freedom to do that because they're being oppressed. When it says that they had no one to comfort them, the word comfort in the Hebrew is closely connected to deliver. So they had no one to deliver them. No one could save them from their situation. And so, listen, one thing about wisdom, biblical wisdom, something that made Solomon so wise is he did not sweep evil under the rug. He didn't walk around and act like this wasn't a real thing. He named it. He named it. I was recently down in St. Louis. I'm getting further education in St. Louis. And during that time in St. Louis, I meet with other pastors from other contexts. And one of my recent classes was with a group of intercultural pastors. So there's a cohort of intercultural pastors. And so picture Korean pastors, this white pastor from Iowa, and a black pastor from Ferguson, Missouri, all sitting next to each other. It was great. I mean, just to listen to what are they dealing with in their contexts. And it's enlightening. It's good to surround ourselves with different people. When I was down there, there was really a Holy Spirit connection that happened between me and a pastor from India. This pastor's name was Kappu, K-U-P-P-U, and I had shared something in class, and he came up to me after, and he said, Billy, I could so relate to what you said in my context in India, and so we just got to talking. And we ended up going out to lunch, and we spent a lot of time together that week. We still email back and forth, but something he told me about was the great war happening in India between the gospel and the caste system. The caste system is a great example of this, where certain people in India are born into a higher caste, and they economically and socially can oppress those in a lower caste, but now the gospel is taking root in India, and the gospel is not about a caste system. And so you see this great war happening in India between these two things. And Kappu was telling me about this battle happening. He said that literally people who are speaking out against the caste system, even pastors, are being murdered because it's so rooted there. And so again, when we look not just in America, but across the globe, this is a huge problem. I think we all need to acknowledge that. But we're not just problem people. We're solution people. So we know the evil of oppression. What is the good? What should you and I go out of here today and do about this? And here's the good. Overcome evil with the good of biblical justice. The good of biblical justice. The Bible defines biblical justice many times, but one of the places it does it is Psalm 82, verses 3 and 4. We are called to give justice to the weak and the fatherless, maintain the right of the afflicted and the destitute, rescue the weak and the needy, deliver them from the hand of the wicked. So one of the things about coming to Jesus is when you come to Jesus, you are acknowledging that you're weak and needy. You're coming to someone and saying, hey, I can't save myself. And so one of the calls for us after we come to Jesus is to go out and help those who are weak and needy. whether that be with our time or our energy or our money, whatever it is. God has called us to be a people who fight for biblical justice in the world. I'll have people come to me in our church and ask if we're doing this, and it just reminds me that a lot of people do this quietly, and you might not know, but from my seat in our church, I get to see a lot of this, and I can tell you that in a world of social media where there's a lot of posturing and saying things, but maybe not carrying anything out, that we have a lot of people in our church who are quietly doing this. I know people in our church who are helping those leaving the prison ministry and helping them get a stable job and a stable home so they don't go back into the prisons. I certainly know many of you are working, helping people through addictions, maybe in your family, maybe among your friend groups, trying to be there for people who struggle with addiction. And I certainly know many people in our church use their pocketbooks, their money, to help those who don't have the same money. But that doesn't mean we just stop and say, man, Prairie Bible, we're doing so great. Let's just all celebrate how great we do at this. No, we can always get better. And so the question I'd ask you and me is, where are those opportunities to carry out biblical justice that the Lord has put in front of you this week? Let's remember that when we were weak and needy, the Lord saved us. And He didn't just bless us to be blessed and say, man, I'm so blessed. He blessed us to be a blessing to others. And so let's carry out biblical justice in the world. This overcomes the evil of oppression. Here's the next evil Solomon is going to talk about: the evil of selfish ambition. We Americans love our selfish ambition. Look at verse 4. Then I saw that all toil and all skill in work come from a man's envy of his neighbor. This also is vanity and a striving after wind. The fool folds his hands and eats his own flesh. Better is a handful of quietness than 2 hands full of toil and a striving after wind. Again, I saw vanity under the sun, one person who has no other, either son or brother, yet there is no end to all his toil. And his eyes are never satisfied with riches, so that he never asks, for whom am I toiling and depriving myself of pleasure? This also is vanity and an unhappy business. 2 are better than 1, because they have a good reward for their toil. For if they fall, one will lift up his fellow. But woe to him who is alone when he falls and has not another to lift him up. Again, if 2 lie together, they keep warm. But how can one keep warm alone? And though a man might prevail against one who is alone, 2 will withstand him. A 3-fold cord is not quickly broken. So under this umbrella of verses 4 through 12, all of these things are dealing with dysfunction in relationships. And this dysfunction in relationships, it leads to the evil of isolation. It leads to the evil of greed. It leads to the evil of workaholism. And so there's a whole lot going on in these verses, but really all of those things can fall under the umbrella of selfish ambition. And Solomon begins here in verses 4 through 6 by talking about the evils and dangers of workaholism or greed. He said, then I saw that all toil and all skill in work come from a man's envy of his neighbor. That's one of those verses, the first time I read it, I'm just like, that is so true. Isn't this so true in our workplaces? We kind of celebrate in America this idea of working really hard so you can just be better than the person next to you, so your business can be better, so your family can be better. I think of sports, right? So you can just be better than the next person. And the Bible does not condemn competitiveness. It's not a bad thing to be competitive, or else, man, I would be in sin when I go golfing with my friends. But what the Bible does condemn is our chief motivation for competitiveness being to be better than everybody else. If that's a horizontal view of life. And the Bible gives us a vertical view of competitiveness. The Bible tells us to work with all of our hearts as unto who? The Lord, and not to men. So be competitive, work hard, but make it more about serving the Lord and worshiping the Lord than just trying to be better than everybody around you. Verse 5 is probably the best example of a consumer I've read. The fool folds his hands and eats his own flesh, which is kind of a weird verse, right? But what this is describing is a person who is lazy and negligent and doesn't produce anything, they only consume. That's all they do is consume. They don't work hard, they don't work hard in their family, they don't provide. They just hope everybody gives stuff to them. So we want to avoid these first two extremes. Verse 4 is competitive workaholism, want to avoid that. Verse 5 is the impoverished sluggard. Sluggards, my wife loves that word. She's like, it's so descriptive of what it means, sluggard. Yeah. We want to avoid that in verse 5. And then verse 6 kind of gives us the balance here. It says, better is a handful of quietness than 2 hands full of toil and a striving after wind. And so verse 6 is the right balance between the two extremes where a person works hard, but they know when to quit. They know when to not keep working till 10 p.m., right? To stop maybe at 6, 5. That's what Solomon is saying here. And you'll see this up on the screen. The New English Translation notes do a great job of describing the 3 views in those verses. The competitive workaholic, verse 4, we don't want to be that. The impoverished sluggard, verse 5, we don't want to be that. We want to be the contented laborer. That's the right approach to work. Solomon continues talking about this issue of selfish ambition in verses 7 and 8 as he's looking out at his kingdom and he observes a person who has neither son or brother. Both of those are family relationships. So someone who does not have family, and you get the sense they're not very concerned about building a family. And their eyes are never satisfied with riches. And so this person isolates themselves to pursue their own money, to pursue their own careerism, to pursue their own pleasure. And they never stop and ask, who am I doing all this for? Like when I die, who's this going to all be for? We already saw Solomon go through this process himself in Ecclesiastes, and he's looking out at this selfish ambition, and he sees this approach of isolation just to pursue our own ends, our own bank account, our own careers as vanity and an unhappy business. So he says that's not the right way either. In verses 9 through 12, he begins to actually talk about the right way. So he talks about the fact that we should not pursue isolation. We should pursue to be with other people. I lost my page here. I got it. He says 2 are better than 1 because we have a good reward for our work. And if we fall down, somebody can lift us up. And if we get cold, another person can warm us up. And then a threefold cord is not quickly broken. As I was looking at these verses this week, I was thinking about this issue post-COVID of isolation. The way that isolation is literally killing people. And we know during COVID, when we were all trapped in our houses, we get really sick of ourselves fast. Families fought a lot, right? This issue of isolation is a big issue in America. And since we came out of COVID, I'm not sure that everyone has come out of isolation. Actually, studies show that right now, over a third of all adults in America are significantly lonely. And the generation being hit the hardest by this is young adults. Ages 18 to 25, over 60% of young adults are significantly or severely lonely. I think there's a few reasons for this. One reason is we grow up in a culture that says that we should pursue career, pursue money more than we should pursue family and community. And that is hurting young people because they're getting older and older and going, why am I not surrounding myself with people in the church or trying to build a family? And so this contributes to it. I think another big issue is the church itself. I think we in the church have failed to make good room for single young adults. Young adults who, we expect them to get out of youth group, go get married, come back, be in a married group. And there's this big gap in the church for how we're meeting the need of young adults who are lonely. And so the young adults could probably do better, but the church could certainly do better. We are actually having conversations about this in our church of how we can meet this need to help young adults. So we're trying to get better at this. But what is the good? We know the problem. This problem of selfish ambition, isolation, greed. Here's the solution. The solution is the good of biblical community. This is a verse that I've had to say a lot since COVID because we forget this verse and it's really important. Hebrews 10:25. Let us not give up the habit of meeting together in person, as some are doing. Instead, let us encourage one another all the more, since you see that the day of the Lord is coming nearer. It is so easy with technology, with live streams, with all of it, to stay in our house, to not go to church, to not gather with other people. But something damaging happens when we do that. There's a story of an old Scottish pastor who was, he had a guy in his church, and the guy's name was John. And he knew this guy, John, well, because he would always come to church, and then one day John stopped coming to church. And so after the pastor had not seen John for a while, he went over to his house to check in with him. I will not try to impersonate a Scottish accent here. My wife specifically told me not to do that. She's right. But this Scottish pastor went to John's house and they started making small talk. And the pastor nonchalantly took a coal out of the fire and put it to the side. And then he kept talking to John. And a couple minutes in, he said, John, do you know why I'm here? He said, no, I don't know why you're here. He said, well, do you see that coal that I took out of the fire? Did you see when it came out from the other coals how hot and glowing it was? And now it's just been a couple minutes and it's sitting to the side of the fire. Do you see it now? It's stale and lukewarm. And he pointed at him, he said, that's you, John, since you stopped coming to church. Because that's what happens to us. When we try to live out our Christian lives on our own, we get stale, we get lukewarm. And that's why it matters that we keep meeting together. So let me ask you again, are you making time to let other Christians into your life? I was like John when I came out of college. I worked in finance, and I was way more concerned about how much money I was making or building my bank account or growing up the ladder of my career, and my spiritual life was a mess. Because I believe this lie that I can do it on my own. And we try to do this until we come crawling back to the church. And that's what I did. In my 20s, I came crawling back to the church, and I got involved with a young adult small group, and I began to let other young men speak into my life, hard things too, and to hold me accountable for my sin. And now I'm a pastor, so look, it worked out. But I just cannot stress to you enough how happy I am that you're at church today, that you're making time for biblical community, and I want to encourage you to continue to do this because it's very important. It's very important. Let's pursue the good of biblical community. All right, here's the last one. The evil of stubbornness. The evil of stubbornness. Man, you guys just got nervous. Everybody's looking down. Look at verse 13. Better was a poor and wise youth than an old and foolish king who no longer knew how to take advice. For he went from prison, the youth, to the throne, though in his own kingdom he had been born poor. I saw all the living who move about under the sun, along with that youth who was to stand in the king's place. There was no end of all the people, all of whom he led. Yet those who come later will not rejoice in him. Surely this also is vanity and a striving after the wind. Ecclesiastes 4, verse 13, I would tell you is worth underlining or remembering because it's a really important verse about understanding how you can even just have success in life. If you want to have success in anything, be more like the poor and wise youth than the old and foolish king who surrounds himself with yes men and can't hear no from anybody anymore. Because look at the trajectory of what happens here. And again, Solomon is watching this happen. This young man, this youth, which in that context and culture had no social capital, was not considered important at all. He went from prison to the throne. Prison in Hebrew, it's literally the house of bonds. This person was a slave, this youth, and he went to the throne. And when Solomon looked at all the people under the sun, when this youth stood in the king's place, there was no end of all the people of whom that youth ended up leading. And so here we see a king who stopped listening to people, who surrounded himself with yes men, who couldn't take any advice. So picture maybe the person who had success in life, they get older, and you just can't talk to them anymore. They won't listen to you. That king went down, and that wise, poor youth who listened and humbled himself went up. That's just how it works in life. I mean, we see this all over the place. There's many illustrations we could think of in how we see this. And yet Solomon ends in verse 16 by saying, even for that youth, coming generations will not remember him. And so, again, Solomon's speaking of the vanity of legacy, the vanity of legacy if God's not at the center. Now, one way to find out how stubborn you are, I'll speak for myself, is when you get married. Getting married really teaches you how stubborn you are. And so this week I was reading about what's known as the stubbornness wars in marriage. And so maybe you'll find your marriage in one of these stubbornness wars. The first one is a major stubbornness war in my home. It's the misplaced object stubbornness war. So, my keys go missing. I say, hey, babe, have you seen my keys? And Ryan says, no, I haven't. Where'd you put them? I said, well, that's funny because I didn't put them anywhere. I hung them on the little hook. Where'd you put them? And then it turns out that I misplaced them because I'm usually the one who misplaces them. So the misplaced object war. How about the navigation disaster? The navigation disaster is when you have a driver who doesn't like Google Maps and they know the quickest way there. They will save 2 or 3 minutes. And then you have the spouse who has the maps pulled up and is going, oh no, what do I do? They're not going to listen to me. And round it goes. How about the temperature wars? So in our houses, maybe you like the house cold. Your spouse likes the house warm. And so, the one spouse will set the temperature cool. The other one starts to get cold and sneaks over, doesn't say anything, turns it up. Until the other spouse notices and goes over and turns it down. And round we go. And I know some of you know this last one. We'll call it the silent protest. One spouse has wronged another spouse, and that spouse says, rather than just openly say, hey, you did this and I don't like it, I'm going to be quiet for days, maybe even weeks, until they figure out what they did to me. And that's great for our marriages, isn't it? The silent protest. Somebody will probably come up to me after and go, you left out these 5 stubbornness wars. So yeah, come tell me. I probably did. This isn't just in our marriages. This is in our families. This is in our workplaces. This is in the church. It's in the church too. And when I was first looking at this passage, I thought, man, why would Solomon talk about the evil of stubbornness alongside the evil of historic oppression? How are those comparable? But when I started thinking about it, this destroys a lot of stuff. This stubbornness, doesn't it? I mean, it leads to divorces. It destroys parent-child relationships. It destroys companies. It can even destroy countries. And it certainly destroys churches. And so this issue of just, we're not going to listen to anybody, we're always right, it's a big problem. It's a big problem. And so that's the problem. What's the good we should pursue? The good we should pursue is the good of biblical humility. The good of biblical humility. Proverbs is awesome about this issue. It just gives us some great verses. Proverbs 12:15 says, the way of a fool is right in his own eyes. It's like that king. But a wise man listens to advice. So which are you? You're always right? Don't listen to anybody? You think you're wise? Or are you the person who will receive feedback and let other people speak into your life? Proverbs 22:4 is also an awesome verse. The reward for humility and fear of the Lord is riches and honor and life. Now, I won't ask you to raise your hand, but if I were to ask you, which of you would want riches and honor in life? I think everybody would raise their hand. Well, the Bible says the path there is humility and the ultimate act of humility, which is the fear of the Lord. So you're humble toward God, you're humble toward others. This approach, I'm sure Max and I, we could point out ways probably we're not humble, so don't think more highly of us than you ought to think when I say this. But something that's been a great gift to both of us is we meet every week to work on our sermons together. And so just outline the sermon, go through how it went this morning or on Wednesday night, and we let each other speak into our lives. And so we'll let each other say, hey, that didn't go that well, or you didn't say that right. And we'll let each other celebrate when something did go well, and we'll let each other tweak our outlines. And we have both found that that is a really helpful thing. Like iron sharpens iron. And so are you letting people speak into your life? Because what we can end up doing is maybe people don't say anything to us, but maybe it's because of the way we respond when they do. Versus going to someone and saying, hey, do you see anything wrong with this? How can I do better? What's your approach? Is it stubbornness or humility? Choose humility. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. It wasn't just William Wilberforce who did that. The person he followed is the ultimate example of that. When you read the Gospels, what you see in Jesus is somebody who was not a problem person. He was a solution person. He gave his whole life and ministry to heal people, to preach and teach hard truths, to call out hypocrisy, to drive the money changers out of the temple. I mean, Jesus was a warrior for good. And Jesus has called us to be warriors for good too. So let me speak to those of you who know Christ. Here's what I would ask. Are you a problem person or a solution person? Are you just constantly dismayed and discouraged and you feel helpless with all the evils around you in the world? Or are you a person who will go out of here this week and say, Lord, where can I be a warrior for good? Where can I fight for good this week? Because that's what you did, Jesus. That's my charge to all of us.